So here we are, Pacific War by Victory Games, Battle of the Coral Sea, and the Americans are on the hunt for the light carrier Shoho, which is in here, and they've ordered the remaining heavy cruiser, the Kent, still carrying the survivors from the sinking of the Northampton. That they've ordered that to steam towards, well, in this direction. I can't tell which way is north, south, east and west. That would be north. So they've ordered them to steam north and intercept the group containing the Shoho, which landed troops down here, and it has successfully found them. So it's steamed into their hex and they've detected each other. And at the same time their carrier group has moved within striking distance here, but unfortunately for them been picked up by seaplanes flying off the, what's this, that's 03, that's Task Force 3, is it? Wow. That has got a seaplane carrier whose name I can't read at all. The Mara, the K Mara, whatever that means, or the Kobayashi Maru maybe. Anyway, that is currently, that has spotted the American carriers, the Yorktown and the Lexington, and their accompanying cruisers. And that spells danger for the Americans because there's an undetected Japanese carrier group lurking here, and their 8-range planes are viable. One, if they move forward, that movement will give the Americans another attempt to spot them. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If they were here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 8 range, that extra point of range could be significant because they could stay at a range where the Americans couldn't strike back. So there is very great danger for the American carriers right now. But they've got to try and sink the Shoho here. So we've done advantage movement, I believe. Yeah, they've only got 2 task forces and they're not moving planes around. So we're in the advantage air mission phase. And I wonder how much we want to throw into this. We'll certainly throw in the fighters off the carrier, and we may also throw in some planes out of Port Moresby. Let's have a look at or whatever's in here. Those are 756s in there. Oh no, those are Japanese. Let's not throw those in. We can't throw Japanese planes in. What have we got in Port Moresby? We've got Force 1 in Port Moresby. I've got some long-range aircraft. I've got some Australians. And I've got some 402 fighters. Okay, well they can go in as escort, just in case the carrier planes get intercepted in some way. So we'll throw those in as escorts. Let's pick all this up then and put it somewhere on the map so that I know what I'm doing. And let's point the camera at something, and let's not spill all the counters everywhere, which is what I'm successfully doing at the moment. In fact, I'm going to turn the camera off briefly and sort all this out. Okay, I sorted the counters out, and I've actually done a bit of the background dice rolling. So the Japanese made a detection roll to detect the incoming plane, succeeded. They threw up some cap. It had an air-to-air of 1. The Americans put this plane out of Port Moresby in as escort. It had an air-to-air of 1. They were both completely ineffectual, and now we've got the actual strike on the aircraft carrier, light aircraft carrier Shoho, using all 3 of these planes. And I was just checking whether something with a combat strength of 0, -3, so -3 could actually attack, and it actually can. There's a column on the table for less than 0, and what you actually need is a 0 followed by a 0 through 4 in order to hit. So you've got a tiny chance of actually causing a hit. These guys have got strengths of 6 minus 2, so these are on 4s, and 4s will hit on 0 through 4. So let's do those first and then that guy last. So the first 0 through 4 gets a 5 and misses. The second 0 through 4 gets a 4 and hits, and that's going to, and then the last plane gets a 6 and misses. So we just get a 4 on our table, which is here, down here. One engineer versus naval is just going to be a single hit on the Shoho, and that unfortunately is not terribly impressive. So yeah, they got in and got in a position to cause damage, but then the airstrikes were not particularly impressive, and that is all she wrote as far as this airstrike is concerned. Technically, I should have given the Japanese a flak roll before all this, and that would have been 3 points of flak. And I'm still wondering whether the flak rolls are individual or whether you sum the flak and apply it, because it seems in virtually every other case, you know, when you're doing naval gunnery it's by individual ship, when you're doing airstrikes it's by individual aircraft unit. I don't see why flak, I don't quite understand why flak would suddenly be cumulative when that isn't the sort of design principle through the rest of the system. And it gets much more effective, you know, if you can roll on the 7 table, obviously you're much better off than if you're rolling 2 2s and 2 1s, it seems to me. Maybe or not, maybe 2 2s and 2 1s actually gives you the same chance of 1 hit and slightly more cumulative chance. No, I don't know. I can't be bothered to do the probabilities, to be honest. But it does seem slightly weird given that everything else is done on an individual basis. So I'm going to say it's a 2 and a 1 and roll it like that, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. So they get a 5 and a 2, and that neither of those cause any damage. So, okay, and the 5 certainly wouldn't have done anything on the 3 table. So, all's fair in love and war. 1 hit on the Shoho and the aircraft are returning home. So before we get to any more carrier action, we've got a ground combat happening for the battle for Port Moresby between these two Japanese units, the Marines and this infantry against this Australian infantry. And so we've got some ground combat to do for the first time. So we'll have a look at the ground combat tables. What essentially happens is that you compare you pick a unit to be the lead attacker and defender, and that has a troop quality, which is this left number here. The right number is the number of steps in that unit, and this is its anti-aircraft value, and this is its identifier up in the top corner, and this is its size and its NATO symbol. Okay, so you cross-reference the troop quality, and that will give you a column of the combat table to use. You'll modify that column by usually by terrain type, and you might get die roll modifiers for having, you know, significant odds in your favour or against you in terms of quantity of troops, and then you roll a 10-sided dice and you get your result, and the result will also be affected by the size of the battle, so the number of troops involved will also determine the outcome. So let's run through it because it's a lot easier to do with these tables than sort of describe in the abstract. So the Japanese are going to pick these Marines with a troop quality of 7 as their lead unit, and obviously the Australians are defending with a troop quality of 5. So we look at this ground combat table here, and we can see the attacker troop quality of 7 and the defender troop quality of 5 puts us on the 12 column. So here's our big combat matrix table thing here. We'll be on the 12 column. We're in mountains though, and I don't think the road makes any difference. It says if combat occurs in a mixed or mountain hex, shift 3 columns left. So we drop down 1, 2, 3 onto the 9 column. Okay. So then you'll see sort of 3 bands of results, and these are essentially the size of the combat, and we have got 4 Australian steps and 4 Japanese steps, so we've got a total size of 8. So we will use this mid band, and the ratio of attacker to defender is 1 to 1, so we've got no die roll modifiers for the size or for you know, outnumbering or being outnumbered. So we're just rolling a d10 on this table, and as far as I can tell, then cross-referencing across and getting a pair of numbers, and that will be step losses on either side for attacker and defender. The red means a mandatory defender retreat, and the blue means a mandatory attacker retreat. So here we go. We are on the 9 column here, and we're rolling across on the 6 to 16 chart. Let's give it a quick die roll for the Japanese and see what they get. They get a 4. That doesn't sound like it's going to be dreadful for them, so let's have a look. 9 column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 to 16, cross-reference those on camera, not so easy. There we go. We're going to take 1 step loss each, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any retreats. I wonder if anyone is broken, but I don't think so. I'll check that, but I don't think so. So just a step loss per side, and we carry on, is the outcome as far as I can tell. Okay, here we are in the Japanese phase of, or the Japanese segment. They've done disadvantage movement. They're now about to do disadvantage air missions. Before I do this, one interesting little facet that I found in the rules is that seaplane carriers, which I thought were rather weak and a bit not terribly useful, can, if you park them in a coastal or restricted water hex, can then act as an airbase for long-range aircraft, which suddenly makes them very useful indeed. Very, very interesting indeed. If you can take your long-range aircraft and park them out in the ocean, but you have to find these green or light green hexes. Can't be in open water, coastal or restricted waters. Anyway, haven't been doing that. The Americans don't have a CVS in their force, so that wouldn't have affected them. The Japanese haven't seemed to need any additional help so far. So let's see how things go here. Now what we've got is this very dangerous strike from the Japanese carrier group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 into the American carrier group, and although they've been detected by long-range aircraft flying out of Port Moresby, which is not interdicted as far as I can tell, despite the ground combat there, it would have been had the Australians been forced to retreat. If they'd got a mandatory retreat result, that airfield would have been interdicted, but it's not. So they flew long-range aircraft out of there and picked up the Japanese carrier fleet momentarily. That's not going to help them though. If they want to do a simultaneous strike, they'd be giving up all their aircraft because they'd not make it back to a friendly airbase. So that doesn't seem very sensible. So they're going to get hit by these 2 incoming Japanese groups. Let's make a roll then to see if this is a coordinated attack. So they need a 6 or less. And they they've got a 4 and it is coordinated. Let's make a roll for the Americans to see if they detect the incoming aircraft, and they get a 7 incoming air during the day. I'm fairly sure is less than a 7. It's a 6. Is this the American chart? Yeah, that's the Allied chart. They needed a 6 to search for air, so they're not even going to get cap up. That's a disaster. Okay, they don't get to fly cap. They won't get to fire flak prior to the attack, and so the 2 Japanese flights are now cleared to attack the Yorktown with their strengths of 6 each. And we saw what happened when this occurred with the Northampton. So let's roll a couple of dice for the Japanese against the Yorktown. Okay, they've got a 6 and a 2. A 6 and a 2 on strength. Those will both be hits on the 6 table. So the 6 here will come down. 1 engineer versus naval, 1 hit. The 2 will be on this blue line down here. 1 engine air versus naval, 2 hits. Okay, that's 3 hits in total on the Yorktown. That's not very good news at all. The other thing I looked up was anti-air factors, and you do group them all together. You add them all together and fire one shot with a single anti-air factor, which is a total. So there will be an anti-air shot now, but let's just grab 3 damage for the Yorktown. That's not yet crippled, but it's lost a lot of its launch capacity, and we'll have to re-evaluate the aircraft situation. In fact, it may be that because its aircraft weren't alerted, they were caught in the carrier, and the fact that the carrier's taken 3 damage means the aircraft also take 3 damage. I'm not sure on that. So, okay, I'm just trying to find the Yorktown and put 3 damage on it, and I can't read the writing on the counters as always. Is that the Yorktown, or is that not? No, that's the Lexington. Okay, I can just about read it. Sorry to keep whinging about it, but the counters are ludicrously difficult to actually decipher. Just this dark blue 1/2 inch counter with tiny writing on it in black. Okay, fantastic. Right, let's just do a flak roll. Let's say they've got, I think there's something about you can use 4 in a screen or 2 in your core group, but I don't know at what point you get to throw units into the screen, whether they have to be there already or whether you get to determine that as part of the process. That is an interesting question, but I guess, and I've not seen an answer to that. I've not seen a thing that says at this point the defender gets to decide what's in its core group and what's in its screening group. Haven't seen that question anywhere in the rules answered. Yeah, anywhere in the rules. I'm just having a look now. It talks about being able to use 2 core units or 4 screening units, but I've never seen a description of when and where you're supposed to form screens, and when and where you then get to change screens. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's give them an anti-aircraft of 4, since I can't quite be bothered to work that out. They roll a 2. A 2 is going to be a casualty. If we gave them 3 or 4, 4 would be down here. Flak, that's going to be 1 hit. So yeah, let's apply a hit to the Japanese and then I'll try and find an answer to that question. Okay, the answers to our questions then. Firstly, the question about screening forces and core forces. You can organise at any time, the rules say. You can reorganise between screening and core at any time, as long as there are at least as many units in the core as in the screen. And so I could have got 4 air-to-air factors by putting stuff into the screen. Perfect, that all worked well. The answer to the second question, if a carrier takes hits and has unalerted air units, then each hit also destroys 1 step of unalerted air units. We had unalerted air units because we did not make the detection roll, so the 3 hits on the Yorktown will also destroy 3 steps of planes. Should a carrier have more planes than launch capacity for any reason, then you also destroy planes down to the launch capacity of the carrier. So at the moment the launch capacity of the Yorktown, I believe, is 3, so we would have to drop down to 3 steps of planes, but they're going to lose 3 steps anyway because they took 3 hits and had unalerted aircraft. So that's bad. They've just lost 3 steps of fighters, and we go from here. Okay, Pacific War Battle of the Coral Sea, just coming into a new battle phase, about to do the lighting, but at this point I thought it would be interesting to do a kind of taking stock exercise. Where are we? We're in day 12, which means that including this day we've got 12, 14, 16, 18 and 20. The game ends on day 21, so we've got 5 turns. If you look at the American situation, this cruiser here, if it goes full speed back towards Australia, it can come here and then here and have to stop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If it goes full speed back towards Australia from this turn onwards, it can make it back in time to make it to port, assuming that, you know, we're assuming that Moresby falls. It could be that the Australians win the battle for Port Moresby, or the battle is inconclusive and we retain control of the port. But assuming that if that's not a safe assumption, and I wouldn't like to lose the entire American fleet based on that assumption, so we're going to assume Moresby does fall. He's got a steam for Australia right now. The carriers are a bit closer to Australia, but given the damage situation and the fact that it does become something of a death spiral, the American planes were weaker than the Japanese to begin with. They're now significantly weaker. The Yorktown is 1 good dice roll away from sinking. And if it's crippled, that would probably affect its speed, and we certainly don't want that to happen. So from an American point of view, they'd really like to get out of here now. Never mind trying to sink the Shoho. They had their shot at that and it didn't work, and now they've got to get out of here without taking disastrous levels of casualties. So this initiative roll coming up is quite important, because if the Japanese win it, they can get another strike in. They can do some detection from here and get another strike in on the Yorktown and Lexington, which would be really bad. The only saving grace for the Americans is that we're going into dusk and night, so hopefully that provides some cover to get out of here. On the Japanese side, to be honest, they'd love to win the initiative and get another pop at the Yorktown, but beyond that they don't see any reason to take any risks. They've taken Guadalcanal, they may well take Port Moresby. They're not going to lose any carriers. Is it a win? It's not quite enough for a win yet, but they've still got chances to take Port Moresby with their troops now fighting there. If they can get out without having lost any of their carriers, that is also something of a win for them. So they could, if they wanted to, advance us straight into the night phase and therefore guarantee that they could break off, because they could move their carriers out of range and, like I say, guarantee that they're gone. But that chance to win the initiative and have that next pop at the Yorktown before it can retreat is too good an opportunity to miss. So we're going to move, just going to let the lighting condition move around 1 into dusk, and I think they'd risk the aircraft at dusk for that opportunity. So we may get a dusk attack here from if the Japanese win the initiative, and the Japanese do win the initiative 3-2, and so we are going into an advantage movement segment. And I don't think they actually, I think they are happy just to run searches now, and if they can find the American fleets, then that will be grand for them. So out of here, Task Force 3 has got the seaplane carrier with spotter plane on it. So let's run that, a range of 1 at dusk. I think it needs a 0, 1, 2 or 3. No, it's Japanese. They've got better search capability out of there. So it's a 0, 1, 2, 3 or 4. They've got a 50-50 chance of this. They've got a 6 and they've failed to locate the Yorktown and Lexington, much to the Americans' relief, and they're not allowed to attempt to spot again in this phase. And that pretty much therefore makes their decision for them on what to do with their moves. I mean, they could also run a spotter against this out of here with a seaplane carrier. They might as well do that. Same odds. And they've got a 5. Still not enough. They've lost track of the American fleets as we come into the dusk. Okay, that really does make our minds up for us then. So we want to get our carriers out of the way. So we will have Task Force 4 drop down here, and Task Force 1. And I suppose that actually the Americans can run searches before we move, so let's have a think about that. From here they could run a search at range 1, 2, 3, 4 with single engined aircraft. So let's let them do that. And actually they've got 2 single engined aircraft units on there, but they've also got long range aircraft that could fly out of Port Moresby at a range of 1, 2, 3, 4 into here. The long range aircraft gives them a better shout, so the long range aircraft will search in here, and some aircraft carrier planes will search in here. Long range aircraft first, then they get themselves a 7, and the other search is a 5, and at dusk nothing can find each other as the light falls. And now I will do what I was proposing, and we'll just make 2 moves like that for that carrier fleet, and 2 moves like that for that carrier fleet. And Task Force 3 will happily just withdraw away back here, and Task Force 2 back into here. And we're not running any air missions at dusk now because we couldn't see anything, we couldn't find anything. So we will now need to do some ground combat. Yeah, let's take care of that then. Then I think the Americans are going to retreat back towards port. In fact, I know they are, so I'm going to do that now while we're on film. these guys will come into here, and these guys will decide that discretion is the better part of valor, and they will get themselves out of dodge up over there. So the only thing we need to do is the ground combat. We've got a Japanese unit. The Marines died at the last turn. They had to take the step loss because they were the unit that we used for the troop quality determination. So we've got a troop quality of 6 against 5 now, rather than 7 against 5. 6 against 5 is column 11. We're down 3 columns for mountains, so we go 1, 2, 3 into the 8 column, and we have got 3 steps each, so this will be on the still be on the 6 to 16 table with no modifiers. We've got 3 strength points against 3, and we have got a 0. That is a really good result for the Japanese. So a 0 is going to be 1 step loss for the Japanese, 2 step losses for the Australians, but the red box is a mandatory retreat. And that pretty much wraps things up, I think, here. I will check the mandatory retreat rules, but I think that means that the airfield is interdicted. Well, it definitely means the airfield is interdicted. What that means, whether the aircraft now have to scramble somewhere else and rebase, or whether they get to do that, I don't know. But that's certainly Port Moresby taken from these Australian troops. So let me just check the details of what that result's going to entail, and I will come back with the outcome. I'm just continuing then to figure out the fallout from this mandatory retreat and step losses in Port Moresby. And the mandatory retreat means that the Australian regiment there has to make a troop quality check, and then we see what happens as a result of that. Let's just roll the troop quality check for them, which is a 5 or less, since their troop quality is 5. They get a 5, so they've passed the troop quality check. So they've got 2 options. They can A, retreat 1 hex, lose 1 step, and deactivate. That doesn't sound very good. That sounds like they'll lose Port Moresby, which they will. Or they can remain in the hex, lose as many steps as called for by the CRT, and not deactivate, which is what they're going to do. So they're just going to lose 2 steps, but not have to retreat. Yeah. So they take 2 hits, the Japanese take a hit, and it's exactly as we thought, and we move on. The last action here then at the Battle of the Coral Sea at Port Moresby, where the Australians successfully defended, the Japanese made another ground attack there, and as opposed to their brilliant 0 last time, they rolled a 9. That was 2 losses and a mandatory retreat for the attacker, no losses for the defender. And although they were able to pass a troop quality check, had they stayed in the hex, the 2 losses would have destroyed their unit. So they retreated and halved their losses, but it means they have to deactivate, and that means they're finished as far as the scenario is concerned. So they retreated away from Port Moresby and deactivated, and the Australians have successfully held it. So now all we're really doing is retreating the American fleets back to port, which they will make in time, because I haven't done them for this phase yet. So that one's going there, and that one's coming here, and 1, 2, 3 more turns, they will be back in port. The Japanese can easily make it back to port, and we are finished here at the Battle of the Coral Sea. I'm going to take a quick look at the victory conditions to see where we're at, but I think this is a draw. So as suspected, the battle for the Coral Sea here in Pacific War is going to end in a draw. The Japanese have taken control of Guadalcanal, They were unsuccessful in their attempt to take Port Moresby. Neither side has managed to sink a carrier on the other side, which is the main objective of both sides here, outside controlling Guadalcanal and Port Moresby. The Americans are trying to hold Port Moresby and Guadalcanal and sink a carrier or a light carrier. And they had that shot at the Shoho light carrier but couldn't sink it. Equally, the Japanese are trying to take Port Moresby and Guadalcanal, but if they can't do that, they can take one of them and sink or cripple the Lexington and Yorktown, or they can try and sink either the Lexington and the or the Yorktown, depending on what level of victory, so decisive or substantive or tactical or whatever. Well, they didn't manage to sink either of the American carriers or cripple either of the American carriers. They came very close. They had that shot at the Yorktown, but didn't quite manage to sink it or cripple it. And so with that, with both sides missing their opportunities, we end in a draw. This has been a look at Pacific War, the old 1985 classic from Victory Games, currently being on the P500 list with GMT Games, and due, I think, in 2021, although who can say in the current climate, but it was P500 successfully some time back, and I think it's due. It's on their list in the next 6 to 9 months. Whether that means anything or not, I don't know. Really looking forward to the new release of this game, though, and even this has whet my appetite. It is really playable, low counter density, lots of counters, but low counter density for any given scenario. From what I can see, I mean, this is very manageable on the map here, and then you've got your counters over here for your forces, but it's not. It doesn't rely on great stacks of counters. It does take up quite a lot of space, though, because you've got these force and task force tracks, you've got the operation display, you've got the turn track here, which is another huge thing the size of this. You've got you've got these kind of displays. I think this is one I didn't put out. This has got the same turn track thing on it and everything. This is more for the I think for the campaign and strategic scenarios, but it's got month keys and general record tracks and air mission flow charts and the phase track and all the rest of it. But if you put everything out, it would take up huge amounts of space, and it's a 2-match game as well. So, although my understanding is that most scenarios and campaigns will just be using a single map. Anyway, super looking forward to the release by GMT, hoping that they can clear up my irritation with blue American counters and just some of the font sizing on some of this stuff. But the actual play of the game, the flow of it, the combination of searching and then attacking, just all feels really natural, really simple, and very fun, very thought-provoking. Lots of options, lots of decisions to make, and this beautiful, simple but elegant time sort of lighting time track where you go from day dusk into night back into day again means that you're never facing the same thing turn after turn after turn. The conditions that you're looking at are always changing, and so you are therefore always trying to look a turn ahead, 2 turns ahead, and that, you know, whether you want to compare that with something like Spirit Island, has that, you know, in a completely different category of game, has that dynamic going to it, and that's what makes it insanely fun. This has got that going on because of this track, which means you're always having to look ahead and see, well, if I don't do it now, what's my chances next turn, and then that double whammy of needing to search successfully and then strike successfully adds layers of unpredictability, and that's what I think operational games need, is that measure of unpredictability. So one of my chief complaints about the Next War series was that while it's got lots of moving parts, I find it all a bit, none of them produce any real drama. In this you get drama because you get failed search rolls, or you get, those opportunities crop up where you haven't spotted the enemy carrier group and they've spotted you, and now they're launching their strike, and it's all very heart in the mouth kind of stuff as you make the damage rolls and all the rest of it. That is excellent in this game. The unpredictability. You can play well, but there is that layer of unpredictability which creates drama and it creates narrative, and that's what I think, that ability to tell stories is very important in games. And I find that with something like Operational Combat series, which I compared with Next War, just that surprise roll before the combat roll means that you get narrative, because you get those moments where the defender surprises the attacker and you get some sort of unexpectedly resilient defense, and what was a 5 to 6 to 1 attack suddenly ends up on the 1 to 1, and you get some story of a heroic, tenacious defense. Or you get what was a shaky looking 3 to 1 attack which is brilliantly executed and ends up on the 15 to 1 column, and so on. It generates story and narrative, and this does the same through that kind of search roll then attack mechanic. You're always looking at how you're going to find the thing that you then want to attack, and the combination of that and this, really nice. I also think this range chart for the naval gunnery combat is nice. Not that, carriers are obviously supreme out here, but that seems nice. The combat procedure is nice, the air procedure is good, the basing, the cap, the searching, it all fits together just beautifully. Yeah, very impressive piece of design. I like the battle scenarios. I think the campaign scenarios still look a little bit daunting, but maybe I'll tackle one. I'm going to do at least one more battle scenario, probably not on film, but I fancy playing another battle scenario from here, and then we'll see. I can't see myself at the moment, the way things are. I just haven't got the stability to set up a really long campaign game and be playing the same thing for weeks and weeks and weeks. My life is not like that at the moment, so that's not what I'm going to be able to do. I'm looking at shorter things that I can manage in 2 or 3 days, bite-sized chunks. But so another battle scenario of this, and then I'll probably move on to something else just for a change, because I do like the contrast.